Hi people, and hello my Chili and Carnage crew, it's Chili here from Live Listen Race, and I'm bringing you a special episode today. This is a worst to best. That's right, we're talking about Led Zeppelin here, of course, you can tell by that thumbnail, and we're going to be ranking all their albums from worst to best, at least according to me. Now, you know how this works. It is just a list, it's according to me, so you're going to disagree probably, especially with this one, I would imagine. But hey, if you have your comments, make sure to let me know as well below what your favourite albums were from worst to best. So really, let's delve into this, let's jump into it, starting from the bottom of the barrel. The first one that we're going to be talking about is going to be Coda, and I'm not sure how much say Led Zeppelin had in regards to this album. I'm pretty sure it was pushed by the record execs at the end of the day, you know, and it had to do with obviously the capitalization on the band's success after, of course, John Bonham's death and, you know, the band calling it quits. You know, how can we make some money out of this? How can we make some last nice little dollars? So I'm not surprised that Coda came out when it did. Maybe I am a bit surprised how long it took, actually, but I don't know. But yeah, I just get the feeling that when it comes to Coda, the band had extremely limited input as far as its release, and perhaps they didn't want it at the end of the day. I don't know enough about the Led Zeppelin history in regards to this record, so if anyone wants to correct me on this, feel free to do so. But, you know, it's technically not the last one on this list as far as, well, this album being B-sides, a collection of B-sides and outtakes, which this is. It's not new material, kind of. You know, it's a collection of B-sides. It's a collection of outtakes from the band. Like I mentioned, the band had split up by this stage for like 2 or 3 years or whatever it was, and, you know, John Bonham had passed away. So yeah, it's not even the last time that a whole bunch of B-sides would appear on an album. However, this really does feel like it's scraping the bottom of the barrel at this point, because, you know, it's more like Z-sides. What I mean by that is the fact that the band had already used better B-sides on other albums, and this just seems to be just the leftovers of the leftovers. So you really are just getting the sides at the end of the day and just going, alright, yeah, whatever, that's enough to make up an album. They'll buy this up. The Led Zeppelin fans, they're going to just demolish this. Trust us, you know, no worries at all. So I guess the only thing I can say about this album, obviously there's a couple of re-recordings of a few original tracks on here, which, fine, they exist at the end of the day, and you can't say too much about it. Like, I Can't Quit You Baby, remastered version, okay, cool, whatever. But as far as new songs, I guess Ozone Baby is maybe the only song I could say, yeah, that's okay, but it's very average. So yeah, this is just bottom of the barrel stuff. We're kicking off with Coda, and I don't think anyone's going to argue that point. So yeah, bottom of the barrel, people. The next one on my list is going to be In Through the Outdoor, and I guess that's really to no one's surprise at the end of the day. It's very little pushback from the community, I would say. In Through the Outdoor is, of course, the last album that was made by Led Zeppelin just before, John Bonham passed away. It's unfortunate, but this just feels like a dreary album by a jaded band at this point. I don't feel the love on here. It kind of feels like they're just going through the motions, and a lot of the band members as well, I think, were going through like heroin addictions or whatever during this time, and it really shows. It's a very blasé album, one that you don't really dwell on for too long, I guess you could say. Instead of creating trends, Led Zeppelin would chase them on here, and it's very, very much at the forefront. Fall in the Rain tries to go for a Santana funk and Latin sound, and those whistles, the whistles off that song is really annoying. Hot Dog also sees the band going for an Elvis meets country kind of hoedown, and I want nothing to do with that track. I just hate listening to that song. The other one as well is I'm Gonna Crawl, which tries to tap into that R&B sound of the era. And, it's weird because, Led Zeppelin could adapt, but they couldn't adapt to this. And it's very odd. I don't know, maybe it's because of their mindset. Maybe it's because the sobriety was questioned here. But everything was slipping. It was like a whole bunch of gears in a motor just slipping on each other, and it just didn't work at the end of the day. Even the best song on the album is rather abysmal as far as I'm concerned, which is Cara Salembra, or however you pronounce it, Cara Salembra, whatever. It sounds interesting, but the synth sections are just way too overboard here for its 10-minute runtime, which really makes the track sound longer than it actually is. And 10 minutes is already a long track, so you know. But yeah, this album surprisingly was a very big commercial success during when it was released. Maybe not that surprising considering it was Led Zeppelin. It was the biggest band at the time, and you know, I guess a new album by them, everyone's gonna just take it all up. But yeah, it's unfortunate that this was John Bonham's last record before his demise. It's definitely not Led Zeppelin's finest hour here, and that's why it's got so low on this list. The next pick for me is going to be Presence. Again, this next pick really shouldn't be a shock to any Led Zeppelin fans out there. In fact, it would be a shock to me if those last three that I just mentioned, including this one here, were higher on your list, because I'd love to know why. It's just, these aren't really good albums compared to the other ones. This album here kind of marks the beginning of the end for such a great band. Like, everything's just cracking at the foundations, and it just shows. It's not a very strong effort. It's actually quite a poor effort, I'd almost argue. We talk about the music, and I have to say that I've always hated this album cover. Right there, this album cover, I just always hated it. It looks so basic, and yeah, I just never really liked it. It's this odd photo on the side of a marina with the family staring at some kind of occult-looking statue. Thank you, Jimmy Page, for that one. And I've always seen it, I guess, as something that's very basic in its appeal and its design. Trapped forever in the fashion and architecture design of the restaurant where I presume that they're in. And it's very much a still life photo of its era. And it shows, the album hasn't aged well, in my opinion, just like the album artwork. But, if you want to add some nightmare fuel to the album cover, you should see the remastered edition, which did no favors at all to enhance this artwork. And if I remember, hopefully I've put it up on screen now. But let's talk about let's talk about what has the album, what's going for this album anyway. Achilles' Last Stand. We have to mention this one here, because this is one of the best songs by Led Zeppelin, that they ever wrote. So it's surprising to see at least one very solid song off this album, but it's not enough to really pull Presence out of the mud, I guess you could say. It's like the swan song for their grandeur and epicness, I guess you could say. And it's a great tune. There's no faults that I can say about this one piece, Achilles' Last Stand. But you've got another couple. You still got like 7 tracks on here. I would say Nobody's Fault But Mine contains some cool Jimmy Page riffs on hand, and it does feel like old school Led Zeppelin. It's fine. It's nothing great, nothing to write home about, you could say. And For Your Life isn't bad, but it's again just it's not great, and that's the problem. Any track that sounds halfway decent, it's just not that good at the end of it, Royal Orleans gets on my nerves a bit with funk and disco style guitar work on that track. Candy Store Rock sounds like, I don't know, a dime a dozen kind of 50s rock style tunes. And I've always forgotten about T for One because it's the last song on the album and it's nearly 10 minutes long. So whenever I got to this point of the album, if I ever got to this point of the album, I should also add, I generally just would turn it off. It's too long and it's so boring. I don't really like that T for One song. I don't know. But yeah, it's a slow jam, of course, but it's just not memorable at the end of the day. This is not a memorable, long, slow jam by Led Zeppelin. There are many more others out there that are very memorable. This one's just not one of them. And I guess that's one of the biggest problems about this album is how many forgettable songs there actually are off the record here. It's got a lot of stinkers at the end of the day. And I guess, this point onwards from the list, all the rankings that'll come up is very difficult. When I was making this list, I knew these 3 would be here. But everything after the fact, except for maybe my number 1 pick, I knew would be a very hard decision to make. Anyway, let's get into the awesome album territories, because from here on, it's nothing but great stuff. kicking off the next one, we're going to go with Houses of the Holy here. Yep. Oh, man. The song remains the same, everyone. What a great tune. Just what a great tune by the band. And, of course, it's a song that's rather synonymous with the band. Also, Max Cavalera would also write a tune as an ode to Led Zeppelin. He would also have this song on one of his albums, except it isn't a cover exactly. It isn't an exact cover, and the song he would reword it as well. So the song itself would be called "The Song Remains Insane," which really does tie in well with Max Cavalera and his style of music. So there's your fun fact of the day out there for you. This album artwork would also cause a bit of controversy. Actually, not just a bit, a lot of controversy at the time. Which obviously surrounds the fact that they used a bunch of nude, girls on the front cover and back of the album artwork, who all appear to be underage. Yeah. That's, I got nothing about that. There's not much I want to add about that. But, if you know a thing or two about Jimmy Page, then maybe that doesn't seem out of character for him. Just putting that out there. But, it's one of these many albums with similar controversies that were all released in that decade alone. Like, if you look at the 70s, it's actually quite scary how many album covers had the exact same controversy surrounding it and the subject matter that the photograph was used. I could probably think of another 3 or 4 straight off the top of my head with like the Scorpions. What was it? Blind Faith, I think it was. That's that album by Eric Clapton. Yeah, like there is that's both of those were in the 70s. You know what I mean? There are many others that I could talk about, but anyway, we're not here to discuss that. We're here to talk about the music, aren't we? So anyway, the music again. Let's jump into another track here with like the Rain Song, for example, which is another beautiful piece that follows an acoustic design. It really flows well within this record here. Dancing Days is also another really sick tune I love. It feels rather jaunty in its melody. I admire that piece a lot. And the album Closer, The Ocean, is an absolute belter as well for Robert Plant. I think he hits those screams really well for this point in his career, I guess you could say. And let's not forget Over the Hills and Far Away, which is another live performance staple that the band would always play. But by far the greatest track off this record has to be No Quarter. And this song, I believe, was also covered by A Perfect Circle, I think, off one of their albums, the live album they did. So, very interesting one. It's a proggy and psychedelic affair that slows the tempo right down on that piece. And it really takes your mind into another dimension when you're listening to it, or that's me anyway. And for me, I feel it's an absolute highlight off this album. Some of the low points, however, have to be the beat like crunch, which sounds silly both musically and in name. And also the other song as well, I can't believe they included it on this album, Jamaica. A song which is a play on words, which is a punchline for a joke if you're unaware of it. Now this joke goes as follows. Basically, my wife went overseas to one of the Caribbean islands. And you say, oh, you mean Jamaica? No, she went there by her own accord. Haha, funny, you get it? Yeah, so it's play on words there. Jamaica, did you make her? Get it? Yeah. Anyway, so I can't believe at the end of the day they wrote a song about that one joke. It's very English though, I guess. Maybe. Anyway, aside from this is still a very cool album, and I guess it's surprising to a lot of people who haven't grown up with Led Zeppelin, let's just say, that the title track would not appear on this album. But that'll come up a bit later on, won't it? Alright, time to cause some controversies here. Led Zeppelin 3 is my next pick. The acoustic album, that's right. Or so a lot of people say, because, the opening track for this album has one of the most iconic and hard-hitting pieces that Led Zeppelin would ever release. We're talking, of course, about Immigrant Song. And, my old man was lucky enough to see Led Zeppelin back in their heyday. We're talking, 73, 74, 75, somewhere around about that time, right? And to this day, he recalls how the band started their gig with Immigrant Song. They just, without any kind of warm-up, without any kind of sound otherwise, or introduction, they just jumped on stage playing immigrant songs straight away. And I feel that. I really do feel that when he tells me that story, and I love hearing it every time I do, get the chance to talk about Led Zeppelin with him. So it's another banger, of course, and I guess, another one as well has to be Out on the Tiles. This was certainly another big track off the album, the staccato riffage, and John Paul James just playing a fantastic bass line on here that really brings this album, or sorry, that song together. A few other tracks that have to be mentioned, of course, has to be Gallows Pole, another fantastic piece right there. I feel like hats off to Roy Harper is an intriguing little one, as well as Friends. I do like Friends. It's no, of course, had to make that joke, but Friends is a really nice little piece. Tangerine as well. Led Zeppelin 3 is a really good album. It really is. But for me, it depends on what your mindset is as far as how you feel about Led Zeppelin. If you like that acoustic kind of breakdown sitting in the middle of an English countryside kind of thing, yeah, Led Zeppelin 3 is going to be your jam, isn't it? Because that's what it was. The mindset of the band was, let's just get away from what we were doing, what we first made, and just get out of our heads, I guess you could say, and dial it down. And it's cool that they changed their direction, and they did it so well here. Obviously, they still retained some of their older sounds here with Immigrant Song, for example, and a few other pieces here and there. But it certainly is a big shift as far as being concerned. However, with hindsight, to look over it, we can see how this was just another step for Led Zeppelin. I can only imagine, being back in the day when Led Zeppelin 3 came out, and then fans listening to it going, they're listening to Led Zeppelin 1 and 2, and then this third one comes out, and you're kind of like, what happened? What's going on? And you would be concerned about it. Obviously, now we know with the history what would happen later on and everything, but I can imagine just being a little bit concerned and then eventually coming around to it. I could only guess that anyone who came, and listened to Led Zeppelin 3 back in the day when it was first released probably had a little bit of a, what would you say, a pushback, I guess you might mention, because it was so different. But anyway, Led Zeppelin 3, for me, another good album, but it's just not high enough on my list, unfortunately. The next one on my list is going to be Led Zeppelin 2, and when I did the recording for this one, or rather when I put the list together, I should say, I actually had Led Zeppelin 3 and Led Zeppelin 2 in in different positions. And then I was thinking about it a little bit more, and I thought, no, you know what, Led Zeppelin 2 is a better album. So I bumped it when I was doing this list. And, I've always had an issue when you look at the album artwork, it's not an appealing little visual, is it? It's just a very brown album artwork. It's got that Led Zeppelin front again, but it's brown. It's all this brown and sepias kind of thing. Of course, the famous photograph on the front there. Ooh, I'm trying to say that a couple of times in a row. Yeah, so this album artwork was a bit of a famous photograph, and I just had to go back to the article here. I loosely remembered it had been a World War One photograph. For some reason, I was looking at it thinking World War II, and I didn't want to be wrong. So, yes, this is, of course, the photograph of the Flying Circus. So we're talking about the Flying Circus, which featured the Red Baron. We are talking about, yes, World War One pilots here. But then we've got some superimposed faces from the band in certain people from the group. So, or rather, the pilots off this one. So yeah, that one I can't believe I drew a blank on there. Sorry about that, Led Zeppelin fans. Anyway, the album itself, though, a whole lot of love, an absolute banger of an opening track, and it's just one of those great ways to begin the album. A whole lot of love. It's one of those signature tunes when you're talking about Led Zeppelin. One of the first ones you really need to sit down and listen to, and you can't blame them. What I found though when I was looking over this, because there's a few other tracks here like Heartbreaker, again another absolute banger, showing that Jimmy Page is just killing it on the guitars. And fun fact as well, if you're a Nirvana fan, they actually did a cover of this live in a radio recording, and that's on the With the Lights Out box set. So they're in some kind of radio, they're performing some songs live on the radio, and then randomly out of the blue they just go, oh, let's do a cover, yeah, what do you want to do? Heartbreaker, and he just launches into the guitar. And, of course, if we're talking about Nirvana here, so He's doing a pretty bad cover, but it's Nirvana doing their cover, you know what I mean? So yeah, Heartbreaker, absolute banger of a tune here, Ramble On as well. But I guess it's these songs which I feel more attuned to compared to the Led Zeppelin 3 and their hits. You know, these songs are much more signature tunes for me, songs that I really know quite well. And that's the reason why it jumped up a spot when it came to my list at the end of the day. Another impressive thing to consider when it comes to Led Zeppelin 2 is just how soon they did this album, because it only came out a few months after Led Zeppelin 1. You know, we're talking about these two albums were both released in 1969. I don't know about the recording sessions, but Led Zeppelin 2 had to be a very quick turnaround at the end of the day. So yeah, look, it's a really good album, amazing, quintessential vinyl kind of list that you need to have. Maybe Dick is another one as well, but then there's a few tracks there that I kind of be like, like the Lemon song, yeah, fine, whatever. What is and what should never be is an interesting one. It slows it down from the last tune as well, a whole lot of love, but again, it's a fine album. It's near flawless. There's very little that I can say is bad. Just stuff that I've been like, I feel indifferent towards. Like the Lemon song, not a great tune, but it's still a good piece off this record at the end of the day. So yeah, look, it gets this spot here, and deservedly, I think it's a good point, a good place for it. I think others are going to say, yeah, I prefer this one. It's in my top 3 or whatever. I can understand that. I really do. But for me, that's where it sits. Going into the top 3 here, we're going to start things off with, Led Zeppelin 1. Yeah, this is an incredible way to just announce your band to the world, if you will. Led Zeppelin kicked things off in 1969 with their self-titled record, featuring, of course, the album artwork that was from the Hindenburg disaster, one of the most infamous disasters, or at least the most infamous air disaster of that era. This is, of course, before all kinds of airline crashes that happened in the future. But yeah, the Hindenburg is one of the most infamous pieces of media that has been known, I guess, for far out. It's been a century now, isn't it? I think the Hindenburg disaster was in the 20s. And pretty much killed the entire industry with one fell swoop. Yes, and Iron Maiden also wrote a song about another air disaster called Empire of the Clouds, about the airline R101. Sorry, not airline. The name of the flight was R101, I meant to say. And that was, I believe it's actually more deadly than Hindenburg disaster. But anyway, we're just getting off track here. So we're talking about Led Zeppelin 1, which was a fantastic way to, of course, see this new band that had just come into play. A bunch of the musicians here, or rather Jimmy Page at least, was part of earlier groups as well from the 60s that were absolutely huge. We're talking about the Yardbirds and all these other groups as well. The Yardbirds, the Yardbirds is a band that launched a lot of groups out of it. What did you have? You had Jeff Beck in there. I think you had Eric Clapton even at some point, who would go on to do Cream. And then, of course, Jimmy Page. And some of these, guitarists played at different times to each other, and some of them played with each other at one point within the band. So the Yardbirds is like this massive springboard that launches a whole bunch of bands. Actually, quite interesting if you're unfamiliar with the Yardbirds. If you're a youngin' and you're listening to Led Zeppelin, go and check them out, because it's like one of those bands that it starts a whole movement. Quite interesting. Still, going back to Led Zeppelin 1 again, and we go with Good Times, Bad Times, this amazing opening track. I love it, that, and launches into that fantastic little groove there. I think it's very of its era, but at the same time, it's so timeless. It's just got this amazing groove, and I think this is probably a song that doesn't reach the best of albums too often, because there's a lot of tracks that you've got to include on your best of. But it should be one of those songs that you should listen to. I remember, I listened to a few best ofs before of Led Zeppelin, before I discovered the album, listening to it and going, why was this skipped, man? This is an amazing song. It's only it's less than 3 minutes as well. Gets straight into the groove of things, down to basics. Very much, that kind of 60s poppy kind of rock sound, I guess, but with a bit more of a harder edge. And you can tell, like, Led Zeppelin is this new group on the scene. I don't want to say they're creating heavy metal, that would be done by Black Sabbath, but their sound was very, very loud and abrasive compared to other bands of the era. Of course, Black Sabbath created metal, but Led Zeppelin's self-titled album definitely has a strong case for saying that it also had a very big helping hand in the genre. Because, this was a big record when it came out. A lot of people buying it. It's a harder, heavier hitting album compared to a lot of other stuff, like we're talking maybe Hendrix or Cream and all these other bands that were around, and The Who, the Rolling Stones, all these other, Beatles and all that stuff. And then there's, what the hell is this? Led Zeppelin just turning up the speakers and stuff. It's mind-blowingly changing, at this point. So, Led Zeppelin was really good. But yeah, good times, bad times, babe. I'm going to leave you dazed and confused. Oh, man, that was a great tune there. Black Mountain Side, another one. Communication Breakdown, I Can't Quit You, Baby, and all these other ones as well. A lot of tracks here, of course. There were also covers of various blues musicians. And this comes up a lot in their discography. Can't hide it at all. But I think it's amazing. I think you got to make a note here that yes, Led Zeppelin made a lot of money from covering all these blues artists of old and reinterpreting their songs, but the musicians also benefited as well from Led Zeppelin's fame. You see, once they got their fame and their songs became known again. We're talking about some of these musicians were from the 40s and 50s and were probably penniless and broke because it wasn't a great time to be a musician around about this time, that era, especially as a blues musician. So it's a bit of quid pro quo, if you will. Like, they're both helping each other out. Led Zeppelin benefited from it more so, but at the same time, you can't deny, some of these artists out there were never going to get the launch, the step up that Led Zeppelin gave them. These guys were long gone and forgotten pretty much by this point that before Led Zeppelin had come around. So, there's a lot of people who will just hate on Led Zeppelin because they don't really pay the artists any mind. But, I mean, they're not ripping it off one for one. They're reinterpreting some of these songs, rewriting a lot of them as well. But at the end of the day, I can understand the argument, is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, Led Zeppelin, the debut album, is fantastic. Great starting point as well. Bit more abrasive compared to the stuff that would come out a lot more later on as well, as far as production as well. That's the main thing, is the production levels. But it's an amazing album, absolutely incredible. The next one on my list is going to be Physical Graffiti, hitting up number 2 spot. So, of course, the number 1 spot. I did a review on this one just recently, retro review on Physical Graffiti because of its 50th anniversary. Yeah, I know. Don't remind me. We're all getting old. So I don't want to go too far in depth on that. Instead, I'll just say, hey, you want an in-depth review on Physical Graffiti, go check it out. So there's lots of facts that I have covered and lots of talking points for that one. It's a long review. I think it's like a 15-ish, 20 maybe minutes. Check it out. I'm just going to point out the obvious 2 things. The album's a bit, it's very long. It's one of those double albums. Probably, this is the one album that a lot of people say, this is their number 1. I feel that due to its duration and the fact that it was an album that teeters on too long. There were a few tracks that could have been culled at the end of the day. This is also the album that features a fair few B-sides that I was talking about before about Coda. So, there's a lot of B-sides that were used from previous sessions from the last 2 or 3 albums on here, and they reworked it and remastered it. So that was where I was coming in with the B-sides and outtakes kind of thing. Still, Physical Graffiti was actually going to be sitting at my number 3 position. I actually switched this around with the debut album at the very last moment, and I think that's mostly due because I listened to this album very recently, and I've come around to it a lot more. This is definitely an album that would have been sitting at 3rd if I didn't do that retro review. So I think that's an interesting one. The big songs that we're also going to be talking about: In My Time of Dying, Trampled Underfoot, of course, Kashmir. Damn, Kashmir is just an absolute banger of a tune. 10 Years Gone, I thought was a pretty cool song as well. And was it Black Country Woman as well? There's a lot of good tracks on here as well. And also, it's got the Houses of the Holy tune, which was meant to be the title track for the Houses of the Holy album that was released before. So I thought that was really interesting. And The Rover. I just want to give a shout out to The Rover, which was covered by Dream Theater on their album A Change of Seasons in a live setting. So I don't know if you want to hear, Dream Theater doing Led Zeppelin songs, go check that out. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say. So that leaves us, of course, with the number one pick, which was always going to be Led Zeppelin 4 for me. When I made this list, I knew what the worst three albums were going to be, but I also knew what the number one record was going to be. Everything in between was the question mark that I just never knew. Led Zeppelin 4 is the album that I think I first listened to by them, and where do you start when it comes to this? This is like the unholy trinity right here. We're talking about 1971 as far as albums that you have to listen to, must have additions to your vinyl collection. There's Led Zeppelin 4, Deep Purple, Machine Head, and Black Sabbath Paranoid. Those three are the unholy trinity. Those three are must-have to any vinyl connoisseurs out there. If you're making a vinyl collection, add those three albums. Because Led Zeppelin 4, let's just knock the head, off right away. Stairway to Heaven, the biggest track of their career, one that has surpassed them and been a song of a generation. There is no denying it. Stairway to Heaven has been a cultural impact for decades now, and I know that people made jokes. I don't know if it's a joke or if someone actually managed to research this, but they reckon that if Stairway to Heaven was played from start to finish, the amount of times it was played on radio stations all the way around the world, like if they took all those listens, right, and then played it only one time, you'd still be listening to Stairway to Heaven to this day, 50 something years later. Don't know if I explained that correctly to you, but anyway, it's been played a lot of times. Of course, it makes that joke as well in Wayne's World, No Stairway, which was an interesting one because Led Zeppelin's notorious for not including their music in anything, which also makes me wonder if I'm actually going to be able to monetize this video, because I like to have the musicians' music in the background. So hopefully I can bring the volume down quite a lot and don't get copyright striked. The other thing as well I want to say about this is it's a near flawless album. Where Physical Graffiti, for example, was an album that contains tracks that you definitely could have culled, and there are quite a few of those, and Led Zeppelin 1 was amazing. There are still songs there that are a bit rough around the edges. Led Zeppelin 4 is the band that has perfected their sound after 3 albums and just gone full tilt, sent it into the new realm, and just come out with such an amazing sounding record. The only track I want to give a mention here was the Battle of Evermore. It's a song that I like, but I always attribute it negatively so for the band Evermore, who took their namesake from this. So I think of Evermore and I don't like their music. I do not like them, and I just find it so annoying that they took Led Zeppelin's song The Battle of Evermore and named their band after it. So I've always had this gripe about the Battle of Evermore, but unrightly so, if you will. It's a good tune, it's a nice little piece. But, as far as the album, it's also the least played track off the record, so I don't think I'm alone from saying this. And for reference, Stairway to Heaven has over 1 billion streams on Spotify. I'm just looking at it here. The album opens up with Black Dog. One amazing, just hard-hitting riffs. It's fantastic. It's awesome to hear at the end of the day. To me, this album contains the best Led Zeppelin song ever made. And no, it's not Stairway to Heaven. It's Rock and Roll. I love that tune. I think it's the best song they ever wrote. It's pure, it's simple, it's just back to basics. Rock and roll at the end of the day. And how can you hate it? I think it's just such a great tune. John Bonham does a great, intro with his drum work at the beginning there, and then they swing into things, and been a long time since rock and roll, and never get back. It's a simple rockin' tune, but it works so damn well. Launching, of course, into the Battle of Evermore, which is a perfect way to roll into Stairway to Heaven. But we've already covered that, of course. Misty Mountain Hop, banger, absolute banger. 4 Sticks, bottom again, shows us how it's done. Going to California, absolutely great track there. And it all closes out with When the Levee Breaks. This song I know was covered by A Perfect Circle as well. And why not? Because it's such a cool sounding tune. So yeah, When the Levee Breaks is this fantastic, very slow piece, and when the levee breaks, we're gonna have to leave it. It's a really bluesy kind of jam, and a great way just to close it out, slow it down, bring down the pace, bring it all down, and just let it harp on. So yeah, When the Levee Breaks, fantastic way to close it out. Led Zeppelin 4, flawless album, near perfection, must have for anyone. And I'd love to know if Led Zeppelin 4 isn't your favourite album by Led Zepp, which one it is. So that's my ranking of Led Zeppelin albums, ranked from worst to best. And I was actually quite curious because, I'm thinking, what's a metric I can measure my list against another one without the comment sections, of course. And we're going to go over to Rate Your Music, which is like, the populist vote. This is where people can go, of course, to, rate all their albums that they like, give a score, and it gives an average, of course, as to everyone who's given a score. So it's an interesting metric. I like to use it. And this is going to be the list, at least according to, Rate Your Music. So we're going to start off with the bottom here with Coda, not surprising about that one. In Through the Outdoor, once again not surprised about that one. And Presence, so I have been right so far, 3 for 3. After that, however, this is where it gets kind of interesting, because Led Zeppelin 3 sits up at the next mark here, talking about 3.78. That's a big jump from Presence at 3.35. That is a massive metric. This is out of 5, by the way, you got to keep in mind. But anything really above a 3.6 is amazing. And everything that is above here is above 3.78. So, wow, what can we expect? But Led Zeppelin 3 is sitting at this mark right here, not where I had it. Houses of the Holy comes up next. I'm surprised, actually, it beat Led Zeppelin 3, but then again, it did. Led Zeppelin 2 kicks up then. And next one is going to be Led Zeppelin, the self-titled debut album, followed by Physical Graffiti. So that's another one that I got right there, or at least in my list. It's the same as this one here. And Led Zeppelin 4 topping off at number 1. I feel like I got vindication here. I know a lot of people would also mention that Physical Graffiti is their favourite, but at least according to a populist vote here, Led Zeppelin 4 made it to the very top slot. And not by a small margin either. Physical Graffiti, score of 3.96. Led Zeppelin 4 got 4.1. That is huge. Not many albums get a score above 4, especially not when they have, 50,000 ratings. So that is an absolutely massive one. Anyway, I'd be curious to see your list, so make sure to comment below. Rank your Led Zeppelin albums from best to worst. Tell me why, or just tell me my list was awesome or it sucked. Either way, I read the comments and try to respond back. But as always, you have a great day and stay spicy. If you've enjoyed this content, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to us, and stay notified for future music related content, because it keeps our manager happy at the end of the day. We are also on Discord, Instagram, Facebook, and all those other social platforms if you want to check us out. As always, people, you have a great day and stay spicy.